Hi, um, welcome to this lecture on developing an essay on theme and conflict. This is actually based on the worksheet that is provided right next to this link for this lecture. So you're welcome to print that out and have that next to you as you begin to work on developing an outline for this paper. What I want to do is ultimately help you figure out how to come up with a thesis statement, and once you have a thesis statement, it will be relatively simple for you to then move on to the next step in this content page, and that is learn about how to develop the outline. So let's get started. What is a theme? This is a review from Module 2, but if you remember, the theme of a literary work is its underlying central idea or the generalization it communicates about life. The theme expresses the author's opinion or raises a question about human nature or the meaning of the human experience. At times, the author's theme may not confirm or agree with your own beliefs. Even then, if skillfully written, the work will still have a theme that illuminates some aspects of true human experience that may be comic or profound or maybe even unsurprising. All right, let's move on. What is the difference between subject and theme? This is really important. A piece of literature will have both a subject and a theme. The subject is a specific topic of the selection. The theme is the generalization about life at large that the specific selection leads you to see. And you need both. You need to know what the subject is in order to identify the theme. So let's keep going. Before we do that, let's talk about what a theme isn't. A theme cannot be expressed in a single word as a subject can. Theme is not the purpose of a work, such as entertainment or instruction. Man versus nature is not a theme. That's a conflict. Unlike the moral of a fable or the lesson of a parable, the theme of a story is seldom, if ever, stated explicitly. Theme is almost always implicit. And if you remember, implicit has to do with that it is implied in the story. We can only examine the theme when we look at characters' actions in the story, when we consider how conflict ultimately helps us understand the theme, when we look at symbols and other literary devices. These are the things that help us understand theme. So if you want to identify the theme, sometimes the theme may be clearly stated. More often, the theme is implied or suggested through other elements. In fact, you can determine the theme by looking closely at other literary elements involved, such as characterization, setting, the events of the story, point of view, tone, irony, imagery, as I mentioned earlier, symbolism. In other words, theme is illuminated through these literary elements. So first, you want to identify the subject in one word. Then explain in one or two sentences what the author says about the subject. These sentences will contain the theme of the work. So let's look at that. You can ask yourself the following questions in order to accomplish this. How has the main character changed? What lessons has he or she learned? What is the central conflict in the work? What is the subject of the work? What does the author say about the subject? Can this idea be supported entirely by evidence from the work itself? Are all the author's choices of plot, character, conflict, and tone controlled by this idea? So before we move forward, think for a minute about Romeo and Juliet. This is a play that I feel certain that most everyone has been exposed to. If we were to think about the subject of that story, we might throw out ideas like hate or love. And if we, say, took the word love, we could come up with a number of different theme statements about that. But perhaps we might say something like, in the play Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare demonstrates that love, when acted upon in a hasty manner, always leads to destruction. So we took that sentence, that idea, love, subject, love, and we created a theme statement about that. Okay? When you're trying to think about building a thesis, any good piece of analytical writing presents and develops a thesis about one or more literary texts, poems, stories, novels, plays. Building a thesis is really not a complex task if you use these following steps, and IDIL are the letters that we're going to follow when we think about building a thesis. So let's do this together. We're going to pick a word that adequately describes what the text is about. Or if you're examining more than one text, pick a word that both texts share. You're looking for a thematic word, not a descriptive word. In other words, novel or tragedy or cartoon won't get you very far. But more abstract ideas like denial, delusion, trust, hope, faith, this is a starting point. So here's an example. If we were to do this for Arthur Miller's The Crucible, we could identify several words such as betrayal, injustice, or vengeance. We could easily build a thesis from this. Okay, this is what I was saying earlier about Romeo and Juliet. We could take fate, love, hatred, relationships. Okay, now we'll move on to the next. In a sentence or two, define the word you have chosen as the text defines or uses it. You can start from the dictionary definition, but remember that many texts undertake the redefinition of words, or they rely on connotation. Remember, connotation is the ideas and the feelings and the thoughts that are associated with the word. So pay attention to what the word means in the text if you find a place where the text explicitly does this. And yes, you can use an actual quote. So if we were to choose vengeance as the descriptive word, we might define it as the act of taking revenge or harming someone in retaliation for a harm that has been done to us. Okay. In a few sentences, we want to explain precisely how the term enters into the text, how it develops or refines that term. So the Salem witch trials provided an opportunity for neighbors to openly express long-held hatred and take vengeance. And this is actually a quote from the play. Old scores could be settled on a plane of heavenly combat between Lucifer and the Lord. Suspicions and the envy of the miserable toward the happy could and did burst out in the general revenge. So when you think about this step of the brainstorming process, this is where this becomes very helpful in your introduction as you are ultimately leading to your thesis statement. In fact, if you're following these steps, you can take this and ultimately turn it into your thesis statement. Your introduction. Notice that you're starting out very broad, and with each slide, we're getting more and more narrow, and that is actually working you through developing a strong introduction. So now we've taken our subject, we've defined it in terms of this text, now we've connected it to something specific in the text, and now we're ready to point precisely to those locations in the text where the issue that we have defined emerges most directly and fully. Now we're ready to write. So your essay will demonstrate through attention to specific words and images how the theme you have defined governs the text that you're analyzing. The essay will focus on those moments in the text that you've pointed out. So here's a sample thesis. Vengeance is motivated by and acted upon by Putnam's greed for land, Abigail Williams' lust, and Ann Putnam's envy of Rebecca Nurse's large family. Now, right there is a thesis statement. That's also a basic structure for an outline, because each one of those ideas is going to become a body paragraph. Now, where we want to be careful when we think about filling in the outline, once we actually get to that step, is that you don't want to spend each paragraph summarizing the plot as it relates to that idea, because that is definitely not okay. So one way we can avoid that, which is the next slide, is to address the conflict. So in each of those paragraphs, give a brief nod in the direction of how that particular aspect is a conflict in the piece of literature, and ultimately how it leads to being connected to the theme. And then as you think about fleshing out the paragraph, you can discuss how characters are developed, or perhaps there's a particular symbol that's connected to, um, that moment in the play, or in the piece of literature. So you don't want to end up writing a plot summary, but you do want to discuss how those specific moments, whether it's the imagery, whether it's characterization, whether it's some literary device, how it ultimately demonstrates the theme. So again, no plot summary. You've got to be really careful when you think about how you're going to develop that paragraph. So again, in each body paragraph, make sure that you address how the particular example of the theme is also related to the conflict. How, in essence, does the conflict help reveal the theme? You may choose to address this in the beginning of the paragraph as one of your claim statements. So I hope this helps you wrap your brain around this type of paper. Once you've done your brainstorming and you've come up with your thesis statement, you're ready to move on to the next part of this content page, and that is to look at how you develop the outline. And you'll see that the outline is going to be very in-depth. It will include your claim statements, it will include your pieces of evidence, and it will include your analysis. It is a full sentence outline, and it's likely going to be 3 to 5 pages in length by the time you're finished. So very detailed, and that is intentional on my part to help you wrap your brain around writing this type of paper. So as always, if you have questions, please do let me know. Otherwise, good luck to you.